everybody, welcome to today's video. I have my returning guest star Emperor Palpatine with me today, and today he and I are going to be discussing what they don't tell you about buffs, debuffs in the Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. So, without any further let me clarify before we keep going that we're not covering literally every buff and debuff. We're going to avoid these straightforward ones that tell you everything in the description. So like things like critical chance up, critical damage up, stuff that's straightforward, we're not going to be covering. This is to enlighten you guys on the hidden or invisible mechanics and math and interactions that go on behind the scenes that we don't see. So without further ado, Cal, please take it away.
Hey everyone, I'm Emperor Palpatine. I've been playing this game for a long time, and there is so much that they don't tell you. Thankfully, most of the stuff is pretty straightforward once you find it out. But today, I think we're going to kick off the conversation on bonus protection and protection up. So, bonus protection and protection up are two purple buffs to your total protection. The protection is based off of your max health instead of on your actual protection stat, because they want this to be grantable to toons that don't have protection yet. So if you're below gear 7, it would still be able to apply, which is why they base it off of max health. And the percentage that it tells you in the specific character's buff, so on Padme she gives 5% protection up for each debuff dispelled with her middle ability. It would give 5% protection, or 5% of your max health as protection. And then bonus protection has a symbol in game. I'm going to use Padme as the example again. It's that weird person standing with a shield right above their head. And it can actually be dispelled by normal means, whereas bonus protection does not have a symbol and cannot be dispelled by normal means. And next up is accuracy up. It's actually more straightforward than you would think, because I think the in-game description is just increases accuracy. It gives you 15% accuracy, and if you went and watched our video on what they don't tell you about stats, then you'd know that 15% accuracy cancels out up to 15% of your opponent's evasion chance, but it will never remove the 2% chance that is a baseline for every character in the game. Then next up we have offense up and defense and offense down. I should have covered this in accuracy up, but it is important to note that any stat that affects your, or any buff that affects your stats does not stack. So if you get 50% offense and then something else gives you 25% offense, it doesn't grant you the 25% offense that was given, or God, that's a hard one to say.
Does it apply the first or the new?
So it applies off of your starting offense, or it applies off of your starting stat. So for example, you have 10,000 offense, you get offense up, which gives you 50% offense, bringing you up to 15,000 offense, and then you get master's training. Let's say you're a Jedi to make it easier, and get another 50% offense. Well, you don't get up to 2,200 or 22,500, you go up to 2,000, because it applies based off of everything without buffs. Now, anything that affects your stat and isn't an actual buff icon, so it's a good example on this one. Young Han Solo, his ability that gives him stacking offense as he uses special abilities with protection up, that stacking offense would be affected afterwards. So he starts with 5,000 offense, he ends up getting 3,000 offense from the stacking offense, and then gets offense up, and then he would go up to 12,000 offense because of the 50%. That's a lot of numbers I just threw out there. I'm sure it's very confusing. It's very confusing to me as is. But it
So,
is important to know that uh, they don't apply off of each adjusted stat. They just apply based off the starting number.
okay, so their effects will stack, but but based the math based off of your original values, not your adjusted values.
Correct.
So I could get 50% offense, be at my adjusted value, get another 25%, and then I'll get 25% of my original added onto my modified from the 50%.
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that.
It's very confusing, but it is how every green buff works, or things that have multiple stacks. Because I know there's mostly it's interactions with Master's Training from Hermit Yoda. Because I know he applies like 25% offense, defense, tenacity, and potency. Um, so their interaction with other things that improve your those stats, like offense up or defense up.
Okay. So how is that interaction the same for defense penetration, or is that a separate monster?
It it depends. So thankfully, offense up and down are pretty straightforward. It's just a 50% increase or decrease depending on if it's green or red. Um, defense up or defense penetration is weird because some things provide a percentage increase to your defense penetration, and some things provide a flat number increase to your defense penetration. Like the actual buff of defense penetration is a flat number, and that is honestly just worse than the percentage, because the way it works is, again, if you watched our stats video, the defense penetration is based off of your defense number. So if you have 150 defense penetration and you go and attack someone with 700 defense, you cancel out 150 of their defense, but we don't know what that percentage is or how much damage we're actually getting through past their defense. It's complex. Now, if you have a flat percentage, then you'll just ignore a flat percentage of their armor. Like, trying to think of a good example, Kenobi has something like 30% armor. Is that right? Yeah, so Kenobi has 60% armor base, which when you math it out, he has something close to 1100 defense. If you had a 20% defense penetration, you would cancel out 20% of his armor. So it would prevent, instead of 66% of your damage being reduced, it would only be 46. But with the defense penetration, it cancels out 150, and then the percentage that you may have applies, and it's very complex and frustrating to actually describe this.
So basically, the more you have, the better, basically.
Yeah, but it also, you get diminishing returns uh, from or the higher someone's defense is, the less you actually get from an individual defense penetration number.
Okay.
Because I think with Kenobi having like 1100 defense, General Kenobi having 1100 defense, 150 defense penetration cancels out like 10% of his armor versus something like Jedi Knight Luke's just base defense penetration value would just carve right through it.
Okay. All right.
Or armor shred reducing defense is just better. It's a better status effect than defense penetration.
All right. So after that complicated mess of flat versus percentage values of defense penetration, we're going to roll right along into heal over time and protection over time.
Heal over time and protection over time are very simple. They give you a variable percentage of your health and protection back. The number isn't consistent for both of them. It's somewhere between 3 to 6% of your max health or protection. And unlike bonus protection and protection up, protection over time is based off of your max protection. The numbers inconsistent. It'll change like for each individual instance that it applies, but it is somewhere between 3 to 6%.
So is that variability just determined on a random generation every time?
Yeah, because I don't know why, but CG didn't want it to potentially just lock out damage over time. Because damage over time is a consistent 5% of your max health every time, no matter what.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never would have guessed that those interactions, and that's why they would have wanted to do that.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because heal over time, if you get a bunch of 6% ones, you'll end up with more health than you lost from the an equal amount of damage over times. So it can either be doing basically nothing, canceling each other out, or still ending up gaining health.
That's pretty cool. Now I'm going to keep my eye out for instances where I get more health back after damage over times while I have heal over time.
Keep an eye on cheer it when you do it. That's the most fun way to do it.
Oh, so I'm not going to see that. Then my turret is does garbage. Haven't raised him up for a very long time.
You got to run those rebel fighters, man. They get some crazy things going on.
Eventually. Alright, anyways, leaving the status of my roster on the side for the moment, we're going to transition over to one that is probably among the craziest that will shed some light on for you tonight, and we're going to be talking about the hijinks of tenacity up and down.
Yeah, so I don't like tenacity checks. Nobody does. And part of that is because of tenacity up versus tenacity down. Both of them will add or remove 999,900% tenacity. Tenacity up will guarantee that you resist every debuff so long as it can be resisted. Tenacity down removes the same amount of tenacity until you hit that base 15% chance to resist a debuff, which we talked about in the stats video. So no matter what, they'll cancel each other out, but your opponent will always have a 15% chance to resist the debuff, unless the debuff cannot be resisted. Despite the fact that you are getting almost 1,000,000% tenacity down.
Alright, well, so since that was all about tenacity checks, how about we roll right over into another type of check where we talk about evasion checks and its associated status effects.
So there's 4 things that affect evasion checks: burning, stun, blind, and foresight. Um, burning is very similar to tenacity down in that it reduces your avoidance by a total of 500,000% to a minimum of 2%. That's right, it still deals with that evasion minimum. It's a pain in the butt when you need that one hit to land, and you have burning and accuracy up, and you still just whiff it. But if you want to get around these evasion checks completely, just stun the character. Stun turns off evasion checks. They are stuck there. They will never evade. They will constantly be smacked by whatever you send to smack them. And then it prevents them from performing whatever action they want to do, so it's a double whammy of good stuff.
Yeah.
Blind. Go ahead.
When I was doing my preliminary research for this video, I was reading on the wiki where like the wiki description mentions, misses next turn, cannot avoid attacks, whereas on in game the description doesn't mention cannot avoid attacks, which is probably the most important part of that. So you would be wasting a stun if you're not attacking someone then, right?
Not necessarily, because there are also your fair share of attacks that can not be evaded, and it's just as important, sometimes more important, to ensure that a specific character doesn't lose an ability. I think my go-to example would be stopping Jedi Knight Luke from stunning your entire team by stunning him first.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And then blind and foresight are the opposite end of the stun evade check. They auto pass it. If blind is the debuff version, which can be applied to your characters to make sure they miss. Foresight is what's applied to your characters to ensure they evade. And things like General Grievous's entire kit do not care about blind or foresight. They'll just go in, smack somebody, and make them regret ever seeing General Grievous on the battlefield.
Bro, talking about attacks that can't be evaded, I was using Omicron Wampa in the most recent round of GA, and I didn't realize that his basic just straight can't be evaded. So I was just destroying this team because they couldn't do anything about my attacks.
He just gave him the womp. It is important to note that if you are affected with blind, or your opponent's targeted toon has foresight, and you use something that can't be evaded, it will not dispel the buff or debuff, because usually they only apply until the evasion check. But if you get around the evasion check, they'll stay there until their requisite number of turns passes, or the evasion check is passed.
Alright, so we just have a few left that we're going to cover in this video. Our next grouping is we're going to talk about heal immunity, daze, and shock, and their special things. Cal?
The reason that we lumped daze, shock, and healing immunity together is because they all prevent something, and in some ways they prevent the same stuff, in some ways they prevent others. So daze, for example, prevents any bonus turn meter gain and attacks out of turn, be it counterattacks or being called to assist. Shock prevents health recovery, gaining bonus turn meter, and gaining buffs. But funny enough, does not prevent protection recovery. Only. And then healing immunity prevents health and protection regeneration, but not health equalization. Shock also does not prevent health equalization because it is not actually gaining health, it's changing the current value of your health.
Alright, now we're going to cover the relationships between critical hit immunity, vulnerable, and advantage, and the shenanigans that occur involving them. Cal?
Yeah, so critical hit immunity is similar to stun in that it forces a fail on the critical hit check. So if you attack a toon with critical hit immunity, then you will never critically hit that toon unless you can get rid of the critical hit immunity. Like with Nihilus's basic, that can critically hit in the same instance because of the way that his ability stacks the buff, dispel, and the damage. Vulnerable and advantage are very similar to foresight and blind. Vulnerable is inflicted on your toon, and anyone that hits them will get a critical hit every time. It will force an auto pass for them on you, and I believe vulnerable doesn't go away as soon as the critical hit is confirmed. Advantage is a buff you put on your toons to guarantee they will get a critical hit. If something prevents them from not being able to get a critical hit, like critical hit immunity, which takes top priority in this equation. So if you have advantage, or if your toon has vulnerable and critical hit immunity will prevent them from taking critical damage, no matter what. But if your toon is unable to proc a critical hit with their advantage, then the advantage buff will stick around until the turn timer runs out, or until they score a critical hit, either out of turn or on their next turn.
Okay, so now that we've gone through just about all of the unique or hidden interactions and about these buffs and debuffs, the stuff that they don't tell you about in game, we're now going to cover some like especially unique buffs and debuffs or status effects. So, Cal?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up before we finish up the video, locked and specialty status effects. Locked status effects, it's important to know this before you do something like throw Beskar Armored Mando at Lord Vader. Locked status effects are coded as a different status effect than their normal counterpart. These are effects that can't be dispelled or prevented, like buff immunity from Darth or from Revan's Mark, or ability block from Lord Vader, or healing immunity from Jedi Master Kenobi. The reason that's important to know is some toons have immunity to those status effects, but the locked versions will still apply, and this can be game breaking if you specifically use Beskar Armored Mando against Lord Vader. Because if you are in Whistling Birds and he hits you with it, you can't do anything. You're actually just stuck there with a toon that can't use his ability. With stun, it doesn't matter that much. I think who applies a locked stun? Supreme Leader Kylo Ren does, doesn't he?
Yes, it's his middle ability. You poke him.
Yeah. Yeah, he gives you the poke and you can't move. But that doesn't affect anything because your character's turn meter will fill up and they can still do that. And I don't know of any toons that are immune to stun outside of Galactic Legends, which
Hold on.
I believe his ability.
There's one that I know of. I can't remember their name, but I know there's one. It's Jedi Knight Luke. He's immune to stun.
Jedi Knight Luke is immune to stun.
And fear.
Yeah, fear is a bit different because it can it's only coded as its one thing and it can never be dispelled, so it works differently. Um, and I have never seen Supreme Leader Kylo Ren's poke work on Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker. So some of them are coded correctly, but some of them aren't. So please just be careful. Because I've known 3 people who have gotten locked out because of Lord Vader ability blocking their Beskar armored Mandalorian. And then specialty status effects, breach and target lock. They breach does have an effect by itself. It'll reduce your speed by 25% and defense by 25%. But then in ships, it will have additional benefits depending on which ship is using or you have on the battlefield. Like Xanadu Blood deals health damage percentage. Hound's Tooth will keep taunt up if there is a breach. So, and IG 2000 can get bonus attacks as well as additional effects that breach has on those tunes. And then target lock does nothing by itself. Literally nothing. It counts as a debuff, but it doesn't do anything unless you have a tune's unique or one of their specials specifically interacts with target lock. And then yeah, it doesn't do anything by itself, so don't just apply it, because I think T3M4 can apply it but doesn't actually have anything that benefits from target lock. So just be careful when you're doing things like that.
So
Then,
sorry, real quick.
no, go ahead.
Speaking of breach and speed, you always see how breach and speed down don't stack. But what's the priority there, or what takes precedence, or
Whichever would apply more speed down, but since they're both percentage based, you can have them both apply. And it's not that breach and speed down don't stack, it's the same as offense up and master's training.
so you'll
It's
lose?
based off the original number.
Okay, and then will it take whichever adjusted value is greater, or does it run both at the same time?
It runs both at the same time, so you end up losing close to like 75% speed from having both breach and speed down on you. It's brutal.
Good to know. Good to know. All right. Did you have anything else before you wanted to wrap up?
Yeah. This game is a game that is hard to understand at this point. I remember when kits were simple. I mean, just go look at Barriss Offie's kit or Luminara and Dooley's kit. That's when the game was easy to understand, and they actually told you what things did in the ability descriptions or the buff descriptions. But so much has been added, and it's hard to keep up with. It's important to read what each thing does. Each individual buff that a tune applies, there are so many unique buffs, so many unique debuffs. We talked about fear earlier. We didn't talk about stagger, which isn't unique, but it does interact differently with turn meter removal. There's master's training, which has an effect for, if you apply it on a normal character and then on a Jedi character. There's battle meditation that Bastila can apply. There's all these different buffs and debuffs that are unique to individual characters, so it's important to just go in and actually read the kit before making any kind of judgment on if a tune is good or bad, or if a buff is good or bad, or if it's even going to matter in this specific matchup.
Yeah,
I know in Magic the Gathering, which is another nerdy hobby that I am into, there's a phrase called RTFC.
Oh yes, I know that saying very well.
And it means read the freaking card.
No, it doesn't.
I'm trying to be polite.
Dude, I literally said the F-bomb in my last video.
All right, fair enough.
Or in my
It
last
means
video that I put out over the weekends.
it means read the fucking card. So just take the time to actually read what something does if you're not sure. Uh, most things, most buffs don't have hidden interactions. They have specific interactions, which means it's in front of you, but you have to make sure that it's actually going to do what you want it to do.
And a lot of that comes from just experience, battling enemy teams and learning kits, you know, because sometimes this thing doesn't apply against a certain character because that character is immune to it, even though it applies to everyone else, and you won't see them not being immune or them being immune to it until you try it in game, you know, or unless you just remember from previous experiences, like what's happened with me and Barris Offie recently about landing critical hits on her team. You know, it's like, yeah, I'll bring a crit chance up team against her. It'll be fine. And it was not fine, and it sucked, and I lost. I lost against an old meta tune because I did not read the ability descriptions. So,
yeah, it's increasingly important as the game gets more and more complex. And then there are some that just don't make sense. You try reading a Galactic Legends kit and understanding it without playing the tune.
yeah, I definitely check out at least 2 times reading a Galactic Legends kit. So, alright. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. Thank you again for this collaboration, Cal. Always a pleasure to have you around and chat with you. If you guys have any questions about things we did not cover, feel free to put them in the comments down below, or if you're on our Discord, you can message us or in the Gen chat, or us individually as well. Thanks so much for coming, guys. Have a good rest of your day.